this week's videos, we will have an overview on international business concepts, in particular from strategic perspective. That's because in the later phase of the course, we will pay much attention to the internationalization strategies. Basically, we will be discussing what are the valuable foreign entry mode choices for firms to go international, and assume that most of you have not learned strategic management or IB strategy related courses beforehand. It's probably better to give you an overview on strategic issues in relation to the IB concepts in today's lecture. And also, a typical way of my teaching is that I tend to design several questions to be discussed each week, because I believe this will help you much easier to grasp the key points of the lecture contents and know how much you've been learning from the course. Therefore, these are the questions we are going to explore today. The very first critical question is, what is international business? Well, I'm not being an old-fashioned lecturer teaching you directly the definitions of international business. Instead, here I will ask you to review a 6-minute video, which is an official report of global value chain in East Asia, illustrating the various aspects of international business activities. There are lots of keywords about international business in this video, and your task now is to get a pen and piece of paper while watching the following video and writing down the keywords that you think are related to international business, as many as you can. words about international business in the video. There are many terminologies which you might not be familiar with at the current stage, which completely makes sense. But the video is essentially an introduction about global value chains in East Asia countries. In the video, the main thing is the concept of made in the world. Remember, there's a picture of an airplane with each compartment made by different countries. That is the vivid example of the made in the world. In addition to made in the world, these are the keywords you can find in the video, including world trade, global production, outsourcing, offshoring, foreign direct investments, export, import or global sourcing, international trade and investment. In fact, these keywords are different internationalization strategies for the firm. International business is about all kinds of activities that relates to cross-border trade or investment. So from the most stringent view, international business is defined as the performance of trade and investment activities by firms across national borders. From the definition here, you can notify that two important concepts are highlighted, including international trade and international investments. So if you can put a simple formula for the definition of international business is equal to international trade plus international investments. However, what are international trade and investment respectively? International trade is the exchange of products or services across national borders, typically through exporting and importing. Exporting means producing products or services in one country, often would be the first home country, and selling and distributing them to customers located in other countries. For example, we produce agricultural fruits in Taiwan and sell them to overseas customers. Contrary to exporting, importing or global sourcing means procurement of products or services from suppliers located abroad for consumption in the home country or a third country. For instance, with Taiwanese really fancy about Japanese sweets and cakes, it is in my case, the increasing consumption demands from abroad therefore encourages many local Taiwanese supermarkets source imports from Japanese sweets brands. Here are some figures presenting the facts about international trade. The first figure identifies the leading countries in the world trade by total value, which means the aggregate value of exporting and importing by yearly basis. The data comes from the World Bank in 2015, and the presentation of the data is based on the merchandise trade, or we can say international trades and product exchanges. So what can you see from this figure? You can see that China surpassed the United States as the world's leading exporter in merchandise trade. Why is that? From the video I'm showing you earlier, you can see that most East Asian countries, especially China, have increasingly become the foreign trade destinations of intermediate goods. This is because these countries provide low-cost advantages in manufacturers or production, such as raw materials, labors, and manufacturing processes. The top exports of China include computers, broadcasting equipment, and telephones. And the main export destinations of China is the United States. As you might have known that China has been called as the world's factory, though it does not like the title very much. Now the title of the world's factory has been relocated to Asian countries, and we will talk more about the regional economic integration issues later in this course. What else can you see from this figure? Do you see Brazil? Are you surprised to see it in the list? Brazil is the second emerging market after China made it into the list in 2015. Before 2015, it was quite lag behind. If you've been following international business news, you would have very often heard this terminology, emerging markets. Do you know what emerging markets are? Briefly speaking, emerging markets are those countries with rapid industrialization, modernization, and they usually have remarkable economic growth. And the famous emerging markets are BRIC countries. Get back to the figure. Why do you think Brazil can make it into the list in recent years? What are the main export products of Brazil? The top export merchandises in Brazil are iron ore and crude petroleum because it has abundant natural resources, in particular in the mining industries. And it's interesting to note that the top export destinations of Brazil is essentially China, followed by the United States. The results are not surprising because Chinese government in recent years has made huge efforts in developing its steel industries in order to sustain its internal development on infrastructure, which often require import of iron ore from Brazil. The next figure is about the annual value of merchandise trade as a percentage of each country's GDP. What can you see from this figure? You can see that while China is the leading country in terms of the absolute value of total merchandise trade, as you have seen in the previous figure, its trade value only accounts for about 40% of its GDP. While the United States is the second leading country in terms of the absolute value of total merchandise trade, its trade accounts for a much smaller percentage of its GDP as well. These statistical results show that China and the United States, given being the leading exporters in merchandise trade, their economic developments do not necessarily rely on international trade, but rather depend heavily on their domestic consumption. In fact, you can see the remarkable statistics from this figure that the merchandise trade is a much larger component of economic activities in countries such as Belgium and the Netherlands, about 120%, and also South Korea, about 80%. So what's the implication here? The main takeaway of the figure is that you can see that some countries such as Belgium and the Netherlands depend very heavily on international trade by exporting and importing of products relative to the value of goods produced domestically. Essentially, it means that their economics highly rely on international trade, and if there's any problems occur in the global economy, such as financial crisis earlier in 2008, the economics will be seriously affected. One of the possible factors could be the fluctuations in currency exchange rates. In this case, that these leading international merchandise traders may not be able to hold their positions as they used to be. What we've been learning so far is the statistics of product trade in the world. What about the service trade? What are services? Services are deeds, performances, or efforts performed directly by people working in banks, consulting firms, hotels, construction companies, retailers, and countless other firms in the service sector. For example, if you own a house, your mortgage may be underwritten by the Citibank, American Bank. In the United States and several European countries, tourism is now the number one source of service revenue from foreigners. In fact, international trade in services accounts for about 1/4 of all international trade and is growing rapidly. In recent years, service trade has been growing faster than product trade. Similar to the prior figures on product trade, this figure identifies the leading countries in total international services trade, including both exports and imports. What do you see in this figure? The top three countries are the United States, China, and Germany. The results are not surprising that you can also see Singapore and Hong Kong. Although being small countries, they rank as the leading service traders in 2015. This is because they are well-known financial hubs in the world. The main economic drivers of these countries are all within financial, insurance, and retail industries. What is interesting in this figure is that India, as one of the BRIC countries, firstly presents in the top service exporters list. Do you know why? India has been the main global sourcing destinations of IT services for many Western countries, such as the United States and EU nations, because it speaks English and has highly educated people specializing in high-tech and information and communication technology sectors, providing compatible services for the Western firms. In the case of the American firms, Indian employees can offer these firms 24-hour around-the-clock customer services, because there is roughly about 12-hour time difference between the States and India. When American employees are off work, the Indian employees are just about to work. This around-the-clock service greatly enhances the customer satisfaction of the American firms. The final figure here shows the total annual value of service trade as a percentage of each country's GDP. Similar to the statistical results of product trade in the previous figures, large advanced economies account for the greatest proportion of the world's service trade. This is expected because services typically comprise more than two-thirds of the GDPs of these advanced economies. Especially in the case of Ireland, the total value of service trade accounts more than 100% of its GDP. Do you know this country? What's the specialty of this country? How could it be the top one service trader in the world? The main economic drivers of Ireland include tourism and financial services. The country is well known as the haven for tax avoiders, as it charges quite low corporate taxes for foreign investors. Do you know that Ireland nearly had gone bankruptcy in 2008? Ireland is the country high relies on international trade for financial services. Due to the financial crisis in 2008 from the United States and soon spreading into the European Union, the country has suffered severe economic downturn and significant political unrest during 2008 and 2011. In the efforts to stabilize the situation, the Ireland government conducted more stringent regulations on its financial industries, and a new era of positive GDP growth started in 2011. The government budget deficit also declined quite significantly from 9.7% to 0.2% in 2014. In fact, after the economic downturn, the Ireland government has also repositioned its international trade policies to attract more foreign direct investments by offering very low corporate taxes, and some companies even don't need to pay any tax to the government. A famous lawsuit in 2016 in European Union was that Apple received the verdict to pay back around 130 million euros to Ireland government, as originally Apple only paid less than 1% corporate tax to the government, which was quite ridiculous, wasn't it? Besides, I don't know if you pay attention to the figure that, compared with the international merchandise trade, although services trade is growing rapidly, the value of merchandise trade is still much greater when you compare the volumes to bar charts in the previous figures. Do you know why? One possible explanation is that services face greater challenges and barriers in cross-border trade than merchandise goods. Not all services can be exported or imported. For example, you can't really export or import the construction work to build a house, repair work done on your car, or the experience of eating a meal in a restaurant. Apart from international trade, which we've just had an in-depth discussion about elements including export or imports, international business is also consisted of another phase, international investments. International investments refers to the transfer of assets to another country or the acquisition of assets in that country, and these assets could be capital, technology, talent, and infrastructure. There are two types of international investments. International portfolio investments means passive ownership of foreign securities such as stocks and bonds for the purpose of generating financial returns. For example, you may want to buy Apple stock in the States, although you are one of the owners of Apple because of buying stocks. You are not in active control of its management. Instead, you were just looking for making short-term money. Contrary to international portfolio investments with relatively short-term perspective and no control over the foreign firm's assets. Foreign direct investments, however, is one of the foreign entry choices for firms to establish the physical presence to grow through acquisition of productive assets. Example can be seen from a leading Taiwanese firm, Foxconn. Do you know Foxconn? It has made huge direct investments on capital, technology, labor, land, plant, and equipment in China for the purpose of expansion in the global markets. Due to the direct investment, Foxconn has full control over its assets, and it focuses on long-term profitability but rather the short-term cash out in foreign markets. You've known the definitions of international business now, so I believe that when you go back watching the video again, you will be more sensible about the contents. I'm not sure if you remember in the beginning of Global Value Chain video, there's an introduction about the progress of global economy from pre-industrial, industrial to post-industrial revolutions, as you can see from this picture. This progress in the global economy, in fact, is highly related to the development of international business. Do you know why? Essentially, revolutions of global economy from pre-industrial, industrial to post-industrial stages is the ongoing economic integration and growing interdependencies of countries relating to production worldwide. You can see there is evolution from local to global scales of production. This is actually quite relevant to international business because such progress in global economy is a trend of globalization of markets, which refers to ongoing economic integration and growing interdependency of countries worldwide. We can conclude that globalization is in fact a result of various dimensions of international business activities.